more than halfway through the book. Let's look at where we are now. Section 2, Sutra 47. Prayatna Shaitiliyananta Sama Pratibhyam. Prayatna Shaitiliyananta Sama Pratibhyam. Of effort, by relaxation, on the endless, and by meditation. By relaxation of effort and meditation on the endless, posture is mastered. For acquiring mastery of an asana, Patanjali gives 2 helpful suggestions. One is the gradual slackening of effort. The keeping of the physical body in an immovable position for long periods of time requires great effort of the will, and the mind has to be directed constantly to the body in order to maintain it in the fixed position. But it's quite obvious that this state of mind is the opposite of what is aimed at. You don't want to be constantly focused on your body, right? We're trying to go beyond, right? The mind has to be freed from the consciousness of the body, not tied down to it in the effort to keep it in a particular posture. So the sadhaka is advised to slacken the effort gradually and transfer the control of the body from the conscious to the subconscious mind. The conscious mind can thus be withdrawn from the body without affecting the fixed condition of the body in any manner. This is a gradual process, but a definite effort has to be made to break this connection between the mind and the body so that the latter can remain in the prescribed position without requiring any attention from the former. The other means recommended for acquiring this steadiness is meditation on Ananta, the great serpent, which according to Hindu mythology upholds the earth. To the modern educated man, this direction will appear quite meaningless, but if he understands the underlying significance, he will see that it is quite reasonable. What is this serpent which is called Ananta? It is the symbolic representation of the force which maintains the equilibrium of the earth and keeps it in its orbit around the sun. This force, we can see at once, must be similar to the one which works in a gyroscope, a well-known instrument which is utilized in many ways for maintaining an object in a position of equilibrium. Whenever we have to deal with a body which is liable to move from side to side or in some other manner and has to be brought back and kept in a position of equilibrium automatically, the principle of the gyroscope is utilized invariably in devising the necessary machinery. Now, the problem of the person who's sitting in a particular asana for the purpose of meditation is very similar. The body tends to deviate from a fixed position, and it has to acquire the tendency to come back to its position of stability automatically. So meditation on Ananta, the serpent, which symbolizes this particular kind of force, is prescribed. The reason why this force is symbolized by a serpent will be apparent to anyone who has seen a gyroscope, which reminds one of a coiled snake with its head raised as shown below. And here's the... In Hindu symbolism, a thing is generally symbolized by an object or animal, which it resembles most closely in outer appearance. How does meditation on this force help the sadhaka to acquire the stability of the physical posture which he wants to maintain? It is not necessary here to do more than refer to the well-known law of nature, according to which meditation or deep pondering over any idea or principle tends to bring down the corresponding force gradually into our life. In fact, the whole science of acquiring siddhis or occult powers, as expounded in section 3 of the Yoga Sutras, is based on this axiomatic truth of yogic philosophy. It should be noted that the word used is sama pratibhyam, which means fusing the mind with. This is really what happens when we ponder deeply or meditate on an idea and open up a channel for the influx of its corresponding power. Sutra 48. Tato dvana bigata. Bhighata. Dvana bighata. I wonder if I'm pronouncing that right. Tato dvana bighata. From the mastery of posture, from pairs of opposites, no assaults. From that, no assaults from the pairs of opposites. So focusing on the center, right? You're not swaying back and forth between the pairs of opposites, right? Let's see what they have to say about that. The third sutra hints at the most important result of attaining perfection in the practice of asana, resistance to the pairs of opposites. These pairs of opposites, or dvandvas, as they are called in Sanskrit, are the well-known opposite conditions in our outer or inner environment between which our life continually oscillates. These dvandvas are of many kinds, some related to our physical nature, others to our mind. Thus, heat and cold are a pair of opposites which affect primarily the physical body. Joy and sorrow are a pair which affect the mind. Now, all these conditions related to the mind or body, which are constantly changing, keep the consciousness drawn to the external environment and hinder the mind in going within. They produce vikshepa, or distraction, and the sadhaka has to acquire the capacity of rising above them if his mind is to be freed to pursue the more difficult task of suppressing its own internal disturbances and modifications. One important result of gaining perfection in the practice of asana is freedom from these disturbing reactions to changes in the external world. It is obvious that dvandvas referred to in this sutra are those which affect the physical body, such as heat and cold, humidity and dryness, and not others which are related to the mind. Patanjali has given in this sutra only one result of practicing asana, a result with which the sadhaka is directly concerned in the practice of yoga. But there are also other important benefits which accrue from this practice. Some of these subsidiary results of practicing asana are: 1. Making the body perfectly healthy and resistant to fatigue and strain, right? Because if you stop focusing on it and you rest, all of a sudden, it's like you can exhale into that center point. Resistance takes a lot of effort, doesn't it? And being distracted by the opposites, it takes a lot of effort, not only physically in the physical body, but also with the mind. And we'll get to that in the next sutras. 2, acquiring fitness for the practice of prāṇāyāma as a result of proper regulation of pranic currents in the body. In fact, those who become proficient in the practice of asana find that the movements of the breath begin naturally to conform to the requirements of pranayama, and it becomes possible to take to the practice of pranayama with the greatest ease. So your body naturally flows into that pranic state, that current of inhale and exhale in a very natural way. And it's nice. It's so nice. 3, development of willpower. The physical body is directly and in some mysterious manner related to the Atma, the source of spiritual power. Gaining control over the physical body with mastery of asana implies bringing about an extraordinary influx of that spiritual force, which expresses itself in outer life as willpower. And that's it. Number 49. Tasmin sati shvasa prashvasyor gati vicheda pranayama. Let me try that one again because I might not have gotten it right. I might not have gotten it right. Tasmin sati shvasa prashvasayor gati vichedha prāṇāyāma. On this perfection of asana, having been accomplished, of in-breathing and out-breathing, of inspiration and expiration, of movement, cessation or break, is regulation of breath, fourth constituent part of yoga. This having been accomplished, pranayama, which is cessation of inspiration and expiration, follows. The reason why pranayama plays such an important part in the technique of yoga lies in the close relation existing between prana and the mind. Prana, which exists on all the planes of manifestation, is the connecting link between matter and energy on the one hand, and consciousness and mind on the other. Consciousness expressing itself through the mind cannot come into touch with matter and function through it without the intermediate presence of prana. Matter in association with energy cannot affect consciousness except through the agency of prana. That is why prana is found on all the planes. It is necessary for the vitalization and functioning of all vehicles of consciousness, physical or superphysical. The capacity to act as intermediary depends upon its peculiar constitution. It combines in itself, in some mysterious manner, the essential qualities of both matter and consciousness, and is thus able to serve as an instrument for their actions and reactions on each other. This intimate relation existing between prana and the mind is utilized in different schools of yoga in different ways. In Hatha Yoga, manipulation of pranic currents is utilized for bringing about control of chitta-vrittis and changes in consciousness. In Raja Yoga, chitta-vrittis are controlled by consciousness through the will, and prana thus comes under the control of the mind. Patanjali has included both the techniques in his system in order to make it as comprehensive and effective as possible. Thus, pranayama is utilized for preparing the mind for dharana, dhyana, and samadhi on the one hand, and samyama on various objects or principles used for acquiring siddhis on the other. Although students of yogic philosophy are generally familiar with the theory of pranayama, and a fairly extensive literature exists on the subject, it would be worthwhile discussing here very briefly some fundamental facts in this connection. This will clear the ground for understanding the inner significance of the 5 sutras in which Patanjali has dealt with the subject. Many people who have not studied the subject or studied it very superficially have the notion that pranayama is merely a regulation of breathing. How it is possible, by merely regulating breathing, which is a normal physiological process in the body, to bring about the extraordinary results attributed to pranayama does not occur to them. The nature of pranayama is indicated by the 2 words which constitute the compound word, namely prana and ayama, restraint. It is the regulation of prana. But what is prana? It is not the breath, but the vital force which keeps up the activities of the physical body. This vital force is not something vague and mysterious which medical science believes exists within the body, maintaining its equilibrium and guarding it against disease and death. It is a real, highly specialized kind of composite energy with a material basis which is entirely different from the other kinds of energies working in the body. Okay, I'm going to read that again. What is prana? What is it? It is a real, highly specialized kind of composite energy with a material basis which is entirely different from the other kinds of energies working in the body. The vehicle of this prana is not the dense physical body with which physiologists are familiar, but the pranamaya kosha, a somewhat subtler vehicle interpenetrating the dense physical body, and working in conjunction with it. In this subtler vehicle, which is practically a counterpart of the dense physical body, runs currents of prana. In this subtler vehicle, which is practically a counterpart of the dense physical body, run currents of prana flowing along well-marked channels within every organ and part of the body and vitalizing them in different ways. For prana, though it is a general vitalizing force, has no specific function to perform in different organs and parts of the body, and is then called by different names which are well known. So as it moves through the different organs and systems of the body, it takes on a little bit of a different quality particular to that organ or system, and it has there's different names for it. Isn't that interesting? It is the control of this prana which is aimed at in pranayama, and not breathing, which is only one of the many manifestations of its action in the physical body. For prana, though it is a general vitalizing force, has also specific functions to perform in different organs and parts of the body, and is then called by different names which are well known. It is the control of this prana which is aimed at in pranayama, and not breathing, which is only one of the many manifestations of its action in the physical body. Ooh, this is the long one. But though prana is different from breath, as the electric current is different from the movement of the blades in an electric fan, still, there is a close connection between the two, a connection which enables us to manipulate the currents of prana by manipulating breathing. This close connection between breathing and prana is, no doubt, responsible for the confusion between the two, but it is necessary for the student to keep this distinction clearly in his mind. The methods adopted in controlling and manipulating prana by regulation of the breath are a closely guarded secret which can be obtained only from a competent teacher. Those who take up these practices after merely reading books are sure to ruin their health and even risk insanity or death. So no one should dabble in pranayama for the sake of fun, or for gaining supernormal powers of various kinds, or even for hastening his spiritual progress. These forces are very real, though not known as yet to modern science. And many people have ruined their lives by rashly starting practices given in spurious yogic literature or under the advice of immature or overconfident yogis. The practice of pranayama can be taken up safely and profitably only as a part of the full yogic discipline, and when adequately prepared for by the practice of the other accessories of yoga, such as yama niyama, asana, etc., and under the supervision of a competent guru. But while abstaining strictly from the ill-advised practice of pranayama proper, there is no harm in trying to understand its rationale and the limit to which one can go with safety in the manipulation of breathing for the sake of promoting physical and mental health. The essential knowledge with regard to this aspect of the subject may be summarized as follows. 1. Deep breathing has nothing to do with pranayama and may be practiced as an exercise for promoting health to any reasonable extent. Its beneficial effects depend chiefly upon the increased intake of oxygen and a somewhat greater influx of prana into the body. As it does not affect the pranic currents in the body, its practice is not attenuated. As it does not affect the pranic currents in the body, its practice is not attended by any risks. 2. Breathing alternately through the two nostrils begins at once to affect the pranic currents to a certain extent and tends to remove the congestion from the channels in which the prana flows normally. It has been pointed out already that there is a close relation between breathing and the flow of pranic currents in the pranamaya kosha. When we breathe normally, the pranic currents follow their normal course. When we breathe alternately through the two nostrils, their normal flow is disturbed in some way. The effect may be likened to the flow of water in a pipe. When the water is flowing in one direction placidly, silt and other things may be deposited at the bottom and are not disturbed to any marked extent by the water. But try to force the water in opposite directions alternately, and you at once disturb the deposit, and if the process is continued long enough, the pipe gets cleaned ultimately. This is how breathing alternately through the two nostrils may be supposed to clean the pranic channels or to purify the nadis, as we say. Now, this purification of the nadis is a preparatory exercise, and all those who intend to practice pranāyāma have to go through a long course extending over several months or years. It is similar to the preliminary exercise suggested by Patanjali in Section 1, Sutra 34, and produces the same condition in the nervous system, namely absence of irritation and tranquility. This exercise is not intended with any risk and can be adopted with caution by those who live a well-regulated and clean life and are not given to excesses of any kind. But since the pranic currents are affected in the process, caution and moderation are necessary, and it is advisable to work under the supervision of an expert. 3. Real pranayama begins when the breath is stopped for some time between inhalation and exhalation. While breathing alternately through the two nostrils, the breath may be stopped for some time, the period being increased gradually and cautiously. The retention of breath, called technically kumbhaka, affects the flow of pranic currents in a very marked and fundamental manner and enables the yogi to gain increasing control over these currents so that they can be directed in any manner desired. Pranayama has to be practiced with paraka and rachaka, inspiration and expiration, for a long time, the period of kumbhaka being slowly increased over long periods of time. Such a kumbhaka, which is accompanied by paraka and rachaka, is called sahita kumbhaka. But after prolonged practice, it is possible to dispense with paraka and rachaka and practice kumbhaka alone. Such pranayama, called kevala kumbhaka, gives complete control over prana and enables the yogi to perform not only all kinds of physical feats, but also to arouse and direct kundalini toward different centers in the body. This science is a strictly guarded secret and can be learnt only by a properly qualified chela from a properly qualified guru. The important point to keep in mind is this. Not only is kumbhaka the essential element of real pranayama, but it is also the source of danger in the practice of pranayama. The moment one starts retaining the breath, especially inside, in any abnormal manner, the danger begins, and one can never know what it will lead to, unless there is a practical and competent teacher at hand to guide and correct the flow of these forces if necessary. If all the requisite conditions are present and kumbhaka is practiced under the guidance of a competent teacher, it unlocks the doors of unexpected experiences and powers. If it is taken up without the necessary preparation and guidance, it is sure to lead to disaster and may be death, as many rash and foolish people have found to their cost. I think in yoga classes we have done retention of breath for short periods of time, but the longest retention of breath periods that I have experienced just happened automatically in the course of my deep meditations. And I wasn't even necessarily really aware of it until I was coming back into body consciousness, and then it's like, oh, and you start the breath up again. Whoop, oh, okay, I was holding my breath. I didn't even realize it was happening. So I have no idea how long those periods of retention lasted for. I just know that they were happening. And then because my breath started again. The significance of the words tasmin sati in the beginning of the sutra should be kept in mind. As this sutra comes after the 3 sutras dealing with asanas, these words obviously mean that the practice of pranayama involving kumbhaka cannot be undertaken until and unless one of the asanas has been mastered. The practice of asana definitely but slowly prepares the body for pranayama. It is the common experience of practical students of yoga that the body begins naturally to assume more and more the condition necessary for the practice of pranayama as perfection in the practice of asana is gained. The breath begins to move slowly and rhythmically, and even kumbhaka occurs for short periods in a natural way. In fact, it is not only necessary to master asana, but also to acquire some proficiency in the practice of yama-niyama before beginning the practice of pranayama. The advanced practice of pranayama arouses the kundalini sooner or later. This can be done safely only after the desire for sex gratification has been completely mastered and eliminated. Unless, therefore, the sadhaka has practiced brahmacharya and other elements of yama-niyama for a long time and has acquired conscious and real mastery over his desires and propensities, it would be disastrous for him to engage in the practice of pranayama. It must be clearly understood that these things are not meant for people who are leading the ordinary life of the world with all its desires and indulgences, and who naively want the peace and bliss of the inner life as an addition to their multitudinous enjoyments in the outer world. The door on the enjoyments and comforts of the lower life has to be shut completely and once and for all before one can hope to make any real progress on the path of yoga. Isn't that interesting? Because I guess it clogs up those lower channels. So if you really want the pranic energy to be moving freely. But I mean, I think it's different for men and women. I really do, because I'm hearing in Chinese practices that women's energy doesn't get clogged up through sexual energy movement. They actually gain energy and flow through it, whereas men, I think, have a different experience. Don't quote me on that, though. Okay. The different elements of Ashtanga Yoga are not merely 8 essential, but quite different, independent parts of yoga, which can be practiced irrespective of one another. They should be taken in the light of progressive stages, each stage prepared for the succeeding ones and requiring an adequate degree of perfection in the preceding ones. The whole treatment of Ashtanga Yoga by Patanjali and the experience of sadhakas lends support to this view. It is also necessary to note the difference in the words used in Section 1, Sutra 34, and Section 2, Sutra 49, in relation to breathing. In the former sutra, the words used are expiration and retention. While in the latter, the words are cessation of inspiration and expiration. It is not due to any looseness of expression that different words are used to describe the regulation of breathing at different places. Not a word in the Yoga Sutras is without its significance and necessity, although we may not be able to see these clearly. The obvious intention of the author is to indicate that the practice of pranayama, which comes after yama-niyama and asana, and which prepares the mind for the further stages of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, is essentially the practice of kumbhaka, even though this practice must be preceded by a long course of pranayama in which paraka and rachaka also play a part. So that was a long one, so I'm going to stop there for now. And then I'll do, I guess, 50, 51, 52, and maybe 53 probably in the next video because they're all relatively short. Thank you for joining me today. Till next time.